At my grandson's 20th birthday, while everyone laughed and cheered, I looked him straight in the eyes and asked, "Where's the $80,000 I gave you?" And he smiled as if it was nothing, then said, "What 80,000, Grandma?" And in that moment, my heart broke, because I knew the truth was about to change everything. Thank you so much for watching and giving me a little of your time. It means more than I can ever put into words. And before I go on, I would love to know where you are watching from. So please tell me in the comments, because I enjoy feeling close to you while I share these parts of my life. Now let me continue, because when he looked at me with that careless smile and denied what I knew to be true, I felt a chill go through my bones. Not from the money itself, but from the way trust can be broken in a single breath. I stood there surrounded by balloons, laughter, and the smell of cake. Yet in my chest there was nothing but silence and a weight pressing down. And in that silence I realized this was not just about a number in a bank account. It was about respect, about sacrifice, about years of saving from my own hard work to give him a chance I never had. And as the room carried on with its false cheer, I knew deep inside that this story was no longer just a birthday gathering. It was the beginning of something much heavier. I want you to understand why this moment cut so deeply into me, because it was not something that happened overnight. It was built on years of sacrifice and quiet choices that I thought were filled with love. I had worked my whole life, taking jobs that wore out my body, saving a little here and a little there, always telling myself that one day it would serve a greater purpose. I did not live in luxury. I did not travel the world. I held on to what I earned with the hope that my family would never have to struggle in the same way I did. So when my grandson came to me at 18 with bright eyes and big dreams, telling me he wanted to start a business, I felt my heart swell with pride. And without hesitation, I opened the account and gave him $80,000. Not as a loan, not as a deal, but as a gift of belief. I told myself that this was the moment he would remember forever. That he would see me not just as a grandmother, but as someone who believed in his future when no one else did. And in those first months, I never asked him how it was going. I never demanded updates. I simply trusted him. Because trust is what holds families together. At least that is what I always thought. And as the years passed and his silence grew louder, I convinced myself it was only because he was busy building his dream. But standing there at that party, seeing the glittering decorations, the expensive clothes, and hearing his friends joke about Grandma's dumb money, my mind began to trace back every little sign I had ignored. Every time he avoided talking about his plans, every time he smiled too quickly and changed the subject. And it all added up to one undeniable truth. That the gift I had given from the deepest place in my heart had been treated like a joke. And while I stood quietly in the middle of that room full of music and laughter, it felt as though I was the only one who heard the sound of my own heart cracking in two. I kept standing there, my eyes fixed on him as the music played on and laughter carried through the room. But in my mind the world had gone quiet. Because when trust is shattered, it is like a mirror breaking. The sound echoes, even if no one else seems to hear it. And I could not ignore what was in front of me any longer. I had spent 2 years convincing myself that my silence was patience, that my faith in him was strength, but now I realized it had been a mask covering my fear of disappointment. Because deep down maybe I always knew he had not honored what I gave him. I just did not want to admit it to myself. So I smiled through birthdays and holidays, telling myself he was building something special, telling myself that one day he would come back to me with gratitude in his eyes. But that night at his 20th birthday, surrounded by people clapping him on the back and praising him for things he had not earned, I understood the truth in a way that left no room for excuses. I noticed the watch on his wrist, a brand I knew cost more than a month's worth of my groceries. I saw the shoes, polished and expensive, the way his girlfriend flaunted a new handbag I had seen advertised in glossy magazines, and I asked myself, is this what my years of sacrifice paid for? Empty status symbols, parties full of shallow laughter, and careless spending that erased not only my money but my faith. And the more I looked around, the more it felt like everyone there was in on the joke. as if I had been the last one to realize that the dream I thought I was investing in was nothing but smoke. I felt anger rising in me, not the kind that screams, but the kind that sits heavy in your chest, making it hard to breathe. And I wanted to ask him again, louder this time. Where is the money? Tell me to my face what you did with it. But I did not, because something in me whispered that words were no longer enough. And as I stood there with a polite smile frozen on my lips, I began to think not only of the money, but of the sacrifices behind it. The long nights working when my body ached, the times I skipped buying myself new shoes so I could save a little extra. The meals I stretched just to keep a few more dollars tucked away. All so that one day I could give it freely, believing it would mean something. And now, all I could see was a boy who had turned into a man without honor, standing tall on a stage built out of my trust, grinning as though my question was nothing but an inconvenience. It was then I realized something deeper, something that cut even sharper than the loss itself. I realized he did not respect me. Not truly, because if he had, he would not have looked me in the eye and lied so smoothly. If he had, he would not have laughed it off in front of a room full of people, making me feel like an old woman who had simply imagined it all. And that hurt more than the money ever could. Because money can be earned again, but once respect is gone, once trust is broken, it does not return the same way. And I felt my hands tremble as I reached for the chair behind me, needing to steady myself, telling my heart to be still, reminding myself that I had survived harder storms than this one. And I would survive this too, but not by pretending anymore. No, this time the truth would have to be faced. And if he would not face it on his own, then I would make sure it was brought to him, whether he liked it or not. And as I sat there, smiling politely while cake was cut and candles were blown, I made a decision in my heart that I would no longer let silence protect him. I had given him enough of that, and now it was time for the truth to speak louder than his denial, even if it meant the world around us would come crashing down. As I sat there with my hands resting quietly in my lap, the noise of the room grew distant, almost like I was underwater. The music and the chatter became muffled, but every beat of my heart felt like a drum inside my chest, because I knew what had just happened could not be undone. The boy I raised with stories of honesty and sacrifice had grown into a man who could look at me and erase 2 years of my trust with a single smirk and a single lie. And it stung in a way that words cannot fully describe. It was not just about money, it was about the countless moments of love. The memories I carried of him sitting on my kitchen floor as a child, asking me why I worked so hard. The pride in my voice when I told him that integrity is worth more than gold. And now all those memories seemed to mock me, as if they had been wasted on ears that were never listening. I glanced around and saw faces watching me, some curious, some embarrassed, some trying to pretend nothing had happened. But I could feel the shift in the air, because a simple question had broken the illusion of the evening. And though many tried to cover it with laughter, I knew they had all seen what I had seen, that his denial was not the clumsy confusion of a man caught off guard. It was smooth, practiced, and sharp, the kind of lie told by someone who thought he would never be questioned. And that realization cut even deeper, because it told me this was not a mistake. This was a choice, a decision to take what I gave and twist it into something ugly, something that carried no gratitude and no respect. I sat still, but inside my mind was racing, remembering the nights I stayed awake worrying about bills, remembering how carefully I had built that account, how I whispered to myself each time I set money aside that one day it would be for something good, something lasting, something that would make my struggle worthwhile. And now I looked at him and saw nothing but vanity, empty pride, dressed in expensive shoes and flashing lights. And I thought, was I wrong all along? Was I blind because I loved him too much to see the truth? And the weight of that thought pressed down on me until I felt my shoulders sink. But then something steadier began to rise inside me. Not anger that explodes and fades, but anger that burns slowly. The kind that sharpens into resolve, and I knew I could not let this end with me sitting quietly in humiliation. I wanted to cry, but no tears came, only a steady stillness. And in that stillness I understood that my silence for the past 2 years had been his shield. My refusal to question had been his freedom. And the moment I broke that silence, his whole performance began to crumble. And that was power. Quiet power that he had not expected from me. And as I thought about it, I felt something shift inside. A reminder that even at my age, with my body worn and my heart tired, I was not powerless. I was not weak. And I still had more strength in my truth than he had in all his lies combined. So while others carried on with the evening, raising glasses and pretending the question had never been asked, I sat in my chair, waiting, letting the seconds pass slowly, because I knew what he did not know. I knew that I had never given him that money in secret. It had always been tied to documents, records, and a trust that had its own protections. And if he thought he could erase it all with a smirk and a careless denial, then he was about to learn that the truth has a way of arriving even when you least expect it. And I promised myself that I would be the one to open the door when it came knocking. I stayed seated with my hands folded, my face calm, though inside I felt like a storm was gathering. Every second that passed made my decision clearer. And while the others raised their glasses and laughed too loudly to cover the unease, I let my silence grow heavier, because silence can speak louder than any words. And though he might have thought I was finished, that my question had been brushed aside, I knew this was only the beginning. I knew I could no longer allow love to blind me. I had to let the truth step forward, and I was ready to do what needed to be done. I remembered the way I had signed those papers 2 years earlier. The way my lawyer had insisted we tie every dollar to a trust so that it could never be hidden or forgotten. And I remembered brushing it off at the time, telling myself that family should not need contracts, that blood alone should be enough to protect such a gift. But now, as I looked at my grandson standing tall in front of his friends, pretending my words were nothing but the ramblings of an old woman, I felt grateful that I had listened, because in that very moment, I knew the truth was still in my hands, waiting to be brought forward. I took a deep breath and excused myself quietly. No one noticed as I stepped away. The room was too busy watching him hold court with his friends, and that gave me the freedom I needed. I slipped my phone from my bag, my hands trembling slightly, but not from fear, from resolve, because I knew exactly who to call. My lawyer answered quickly, his voice steady, and when I explained what had just happened, his tone turned sharper. He reminded me that everything was documented. Every transfer, every agreement, every rule of the trust, and that what he had done was not only a betrayal of my love, but a betrayal of the law itself. And as I ended the call, I felt a strength rising in me, because I was no longer carrying this weight alone. I sat back down, and this time I felt different, calmer, steadier, almost as if the anger that had been eating away at me had turned into something sharper, a quiet determination that refused to let me crumble. And as I watched him laugh and boast, the crowd circling him as if he were a king, I thought to myself, enjoy this moment, because it will be the last time you stand so tall on the shoulders of my trust. And though my heart still ached with the knowledge that it had come to this, I knew there was no turning back. The truth was already moving toward him. And when it arrived, it would not knock gently. It would break through the door for everyone to see. And in that thought, I found a strange kind of peace. Because for the first time in 2 years, I no longer felt helpless. I no longer felt like a woman waiting in silence for answers that would never come. I felt like a woman who had remembered her strength. A woman who had chosen not to let betrayal be the final word. And though I knew the night was about to take a turn no one expected, I was ready for it, ready to face whatever storm the truth would bring. I sat there with my back straight and my hands resting gently in my lap, my eyes moving slowly around the room, pretending to admire the decorations and the laughter. But inside I was counting the minutes, every tick of the clock pulling me closer to what I knew was coming. And though my face carried the same soft smile I had worn for years, my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Because I had made my choice. I was no longer going to sit in silence and let him treat me like a forgotten voice in his story. I was going to let the truth step into the light, even if it meant breaking this family gathering wide open. I thought of the times I had let things slide before. Little moments when he had dismissed my questions, little excuses I had swallowed because I loved him. And it pained me to realize that each time I had done that, I had given him permission to believe I would never hold him accountable. And perhaps that was my mistake. Loving him so fiercely that I chose to cover my eyes when the signs were right in front of me. But that night, sitting at his birthday, surrounded by lights and music that felt more like noise than celebration, I promised myself there would be no more excuses, no more covering my eyes, because love without truth becomes nothing but weakness. And I could not allow myself to live in that weakness any longer. I reached into my bag once more, my fingers brushing the phone, and I thought about how far I had come in my life. How many times I had been underestimated, how often people assumed that age meant silence, that wrinkles meant surrender, and I smiled to myself, because what they did not know was that strength grows in silence. It builds in the quiet corners where others think nothing is happening. And when it finally rises, it is not loud or frantic, it is steady, it is unshakable. And that was the strength filling me in that moment. The kind of strength my grandson had clearly never expected me to have. The air in the room began to feel heavier. Or maybe it was just me sensing what no one else could see, sensing that the tide was about to turn. And though I sat quietly with the same calm expression, I could feel the energy shifting. As if somewhere beyond those walls the truth was already walking closer step by step, ready to arrive. And I whispered inside myself, "Let it come. Let it arrive. Because I am no longer afraid, and whatever storm it brings, I will meet it with steady hands and an unbroken heart." And as I looked at him across the room, laughing, smiling, completely unaware of what was about to unfold, I felt something almost bittersweet, because I remembered the boy he once was, the boy I believed in so completely. And I wished it had never come to this. I wished the story had ended differently, but life rarely grants us the endings we hope for. Instead, it gives us the endings we earn. And in that moment, I knew he was about to face the ending he had written for himself. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt ready to turn the page. The minutes slipped by slowly, but I felt each one settle into my chest like a weight being lifted, because I knew what was coming, and though no one else in that room had the slightest idea, I could already sense it drawing near. And as the laughter grew louder and the music carried on, I sat still with a calmness that surprised even me. A calmness born from knowing that the truth was already on its way, steady and unstoppable. And there was nothing he could do to silence it now. I kept my eyes on him from across the room, watching the way he laughed too hard, the way he waved his hand as if he owned the world, the way he leaned into his friends and basked in their empty praise. And I thought to myself, this is the face of someone who believes he is untouchable, someone who thinks love is endless forgiveness, someone who has forgotten that respect has to be earned. And as much as my heart ached to admit it, I could see in his smile that he did not think of me as the woman who gave him everything. He thought of me as someone he could use and discard. And that truth stung more deeply than I expected. The sound of the door opening cut through the room, soft at first, but to me it was like thunder. And when I saw the two men step inside with their calm, measured expressions, the air shifted instantly. The chatter grew quiet, glasses froze halfway to lips, and all eyes began to turn, not in my direction but toward them, because they carried with them something no one could ignore. They carried the weight of authority. And though they spoke politely, asking to have a word, I could already see his face change, the color draining from his cheeks, his posture stiffening, the grin faltering as if it had been ripped away by unseen hands. I stayed seated, my hands steady in my lap, my heart steady in my chest, because this was no longer my burden to carry. It was his. And as the room began to buzz with confusion and whispers, I did not need to say a word. The truth was speaking louder than I ever could. And in that silence I felt something wash over me. Not joy, not triumph, but a quiet release. The kind of release that comes when you finally stop holding something heavy alone, and you watch as it is placed where it belongs, on the shoulders of the one who created it. And when his eyes darted across the room, searching for help, for sympathy, perhaps even for me, I did not look away. I held his gaze. not with anger, not with cruelty, but with the kind of steady sorrow that says, "This is not what I wanted for you, but this is what you chose." And for the first time that evening, he seemed small, smaller than I had ever seen him. And I knew the moment he realized the world was no longer laughing with him. They were staring, waiting, and he had no place left to hide. The room seemed to shrink the moment they asked his name, their voices calm but firm. And I watched as his smile collapsed completely, his friends stepping back as if they had never known him. And the weight of silence pressed down on everyone until it felt like even the walls were listening. And though he tried to laugh it off, waving his hands as if this were some misunderstanding, I saw the tremor in his fingers, the way his voice cracked when he said there must be a mistake. But mistakes do not come with documents. Mistakes do not carry signatures and records. Mistakes do not follow you into a room full of people who suddenly realize the celebration they were part of had been built on lies. One of the men opened a folder, the papers neat and undeniable, and when they laid them out on the table, I saw his eyes dart across the lines, his lips parting as if he could swallow the truth back down before it escaped. But it was too late. Every transfer, every note, every condition spelled out clearly the proof that the money I had given in love had been twisted into fraud, and the shame of it filled the air so thickly that no one dared speak. And as I watched him stumble through excuses, claiming he did not remember, claiming someone else must have handled it, I felt the ache in my chest sharpen into something colder, because I realized then that he was not only willing to betray me, he was willing to lie again and again, even with the truth staring him in the face. I did not move, I did not rise from my chair, I let the evidence do the speaking. And though my heart cried out with the memory of the boy I had once believed in, I forced myself to see the man standing before me now. A man caught in the web he had woven, and I thought to myself, this is the price of dishonor. This is the cost of forgetting that every gift carries responsibility. And as he lowered his head, his voice fading into whispers, no one believed. I felt the shift in the room, the admiration gone, the respect gone, only pity and quiet judgment left behind. And he knew it too, because when he finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, there was no defiance, only fear. Fear of what was coming next. Fear of the truth that had finally arrived and stripped him of the mask he had worn so proudly. I could feel the weight of every stare in that room as the officers stood firm and my grandson stumbled over his own words, the air so heavy it seemed no one dared to breathe. And though I sat quietly, my heart was alive with a storm of sorrow and strength. Because this was the moment when truth laid bare the difference between love and accountability. And I knew every person watching would carry the memory of what unfolded that night. The night when denial turned to panic. And the mask of arrogance finally slipped away. Some of the family looked at me with wide eyes, not sure whether to pity me or to blame me. And I could see the questions flicker across their faces. Why bring this here? Why not keep it quiet? Why let the world see our shame? But none of them had walked in my shoes. None of them had worked through aching bones and long nights to save what I gave. None of them had felt the sharp sting of betrayal, when the very person you trusted most laughs at your question in front of strangers. And so I held my head high, not with pride, but with dignity, because I would rather carry the weight of truth than sit silent under the shadow of lies. He tried once more to reach for me, his voice cracking as he said I must have misunderstood, that I was confused, that I had forgotten. But my silence told him more than words ever could, because I remembered everything, every dollar, every promise, every hope I had placed into his hands. And as he spoke, I saw the others turning away from him, shaking their heads, their laughter gone, their admiration gone, and he began to realize that the world he had built with my sacrifice was collapsing in front of him, piece by piece, while I sat steady and unshaken, watching the truth do what love alone could not. And in that moment, as the officers moved closer, as his girlfriend slipped quietly out the door, as his friends stepped back to distance themselves from the fire now burning at his feet, I felt no joy, no triumph, only a deep ache in my chest, because this was not the ending I had once imagined, not the legacy I had wanted to leave in his hands. But sometimes endings are not about what we want. they are about what is necessary. And though my heart still longed for the boy he once was, I knew the man standing before me had chosen this path, and now he had to face it, whether he was ready or not. The officers stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, their voices calm but unyielding as they told him he would need to come with them. And the moment those words were spoken, the entire room seemed to tilt, as though the ground itself had shifted, because this was no longer just a birthday party. It was the unraveling of every lie he had wrapped himself in. And I could see it in his eyes. The sudden terror, the realization that the night he thought would be filled with celebration was now turning into a reckoning he could not escape. His protests grew weaker, his excuses more desperate, and the louder he spoke, the less anyone believed him. Because the evidence was undeniable, laid out in black and white for all to see. And the more he struggled to defend himself, the more the silence of the room swallowed his words, until his voice sounded like nothing more than a child's cry against a storm too strong to fight. And I sat there watching, my heart heavy but steady, because this was not what I wanted for him. But it was what he had chosen, and I could not take that choice away from him. I thought of the boy I once held in my arms, the boy I fed at my table, the boy I told stories to about honor, about honesty, about the kind of man I hoped he would become. And it cut me deeply to see how far from that path he had strayed. But I also thought of the woman I had been when I gave him that money, the woman who believed so fiercely in his dream that she never asked for proof. And I realized that she deserved justice too, that my years of sacrifice deserved more than being laughed at and dismissed. And in that realization I found a strange kind of strength. The strength to let go of my guilt and accept that this was not my shame to carry. It was his. When they placed the cuffs around his wrists, the sound was soft but final, like a door closing on a chapter that could never be reopened. And as he looked around the room, searching for sympathy, his eyes fell on mine. And for the first time in a long time, he did not see someone to manipulate. He did not see someone who would cover for him. He saw a woman who had finally chosen the truth over silence. And I held his gaze, not with anger, not with hate, but with the quiet sorrow of someone who has loved too much and been hurt too deeply. And I whispered inside myself, maybe now you will understand that real value is not in money. It is in trust. And once broken, it can never be bought back. When the door closed behind them and the sound of footsteps faded, the room was left in a silence so thick it seemed to cling to the walls. No one lifted their glass, no one dared to start the music again, because what had just unfolded could not be swept away like crumbs from a table. It was a truth that lingered, heavy and undeniable, and I sat there with my hands resting still, letting the quiet settle over me, because I did not need to explain myself to anyone. The evidence had spoken for me, and the choice he made had delivered its own punishment. I thought about all the sacrifices hidden inside that $80,000, the years of labor, the aching hands, the meals stretched thin, the moments I denied myself small comforts so that one day my family could have more. And for so long I told myself that this was the purpose of my life, to give, to lift, to believe. But now I understood something deeper, something painful but true, that giving without wisdom can become its own kind of blindness. And while love is a gift, it must walk hand in hand with accountability. Otherwise, it becomes an open door for betrayal to walk through. And that night I learned that lesson in the hardest way. I did not feel pride, I did not feel victory. What I felt was a quiet strength, the kind that comes when you finally refuse to be treated like a fool. The kind that comes when you choose dignity over silence. And though the ache in my chest was heavy, I knew I had done what needed to be done, not only for myself, but for the memory of every sacrifice that money represented. Because to allow it to be wasted, mocked, and denied would have been to erase my own life's work. And I could not allow that. Not for him, not for anyone. As I looked around the room, I saw the shame on some faces, the pity on others. But I felt no shame. Because betrayal is not the burden of the betrayed. It belongs to the one who chooses deceit. And though the path ahead would not be easy, though family bonds would be strained and trust would take time to heal, I knew in my heart that I had reclaimed something more important than money. I had reclaimed my voice, my strength, and my right to be respected. And in that moment, I understood that even in sorrow there can be a kind of victory, not loud, not celebrated, but quiet, steady, and unbreakable. As I left that night, stepping into the cool air and away from the heavy silence of the room, I felt the weight of sorrow pressing on me, but also the calm of knowing I had chosen truth over denial. Because sometimes love is not about protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes it is about letting them face what they have created. And though it hurt deeply to see my own grandson led away, I reminded myself that respect is not given freely. It is earned, and once it is broken, it may never return. But dignity is something you can always hold on to, no matter what others do to you, and that is what I carried with me as I walked away. The quiet dignity of someone who refused to be silenced by betrayal. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of my story. It means more to me than I can ever say. And if my words touched you, I would love to know where you are watching from. So please share it in the comments. And if you have ever carried the weight of betrayal, know that you are not alone. We walk through these truths together. So do not forget to subscribe and stay with me for the next.